This is Everyday Climate Change Interviews. My name is James Whitlow Delano, founder of Everyday Climate Change on Instagram. I will be interviewing climate change photographers, environmentalists, and artists on this new YouTube channel. For my first interview, I will be talking with Esther Horvath. She was born and raised in Hungary and is best known for her photography in the Arctic. Her first long-term project was Icebreaker, and more recently she joined the Alfred Wegener Institute on the Mosaic expedition, where the polar stern icebreaker was intentionally frozen into the ice pack. This way they could study the ice throughout the winter, which was a human first. That work earned her a World Press Photo Award in 2020. If you like what you're seeing, please hit the subscribe button in the bottom right, and let's get started. Welcome, Esther. Thank you so much for joining me. And I think what I'll do is I'll hand it over to you, and you can share with us your photographs and your presentation.
Thank you, James, for inviting me for this talk and interview. And I also want to tell that, yes, Icebreaker is my long-term documentary project, but actually my journey to the Arctic, to the polar region, started a year before that, in 2015, with an assignment on US Coast Guard icebreaker Healy, and that was an assignment from Audubon magazine. I would like to share now some images which I wanted to show, talk about my work, talk about how I get there, what is my interest, and also I want to talk about the Mosaic expedition, which is the largest Arctic Ocean science expedition of our time. So I would like to share some images from my work and how my love and connection to the polar region started. I started working in the Arctic Ocean in 2015 with an assignment of Audubon magazine. And this is when my deep love and deep care for the Arctic Ocean and Arctic started. Since then, I have been working with many different research groups who want to understand the changing Arctic and consequences of global warming. This is one of my very first images, and it's an important one. And what we can see here, it is Miss Piggy, this tethered balloon, this red tethered balloon. And here we are at Station Nord Military and Science Station, which is the northernmost location of Greenland. This balloon can go up to 1,500 meters in the air, measuring temperature, ozone, pressure, and black carbon. Why are these measurements so important? Because these atmospheric measurements are extremely important to understand the changes in the Arctic, where the average air temperature increases 2 to 3 times faster than anywhere else on the planet. I'm working many times in the Arctic during the winter time, and just one interesting thing to this photo, I remember that on this day it was a negative 42 Fahrenheit, which is approximately the same in Celsius, and it was an extremely cold day. So this picture is Icebreaker. It's one of the main image of Icebreaker, or one of my favorite picture of my long-term documentary Icebreaker, which James just also mentioned. And I talked about the increasing air temperature with the previous photo, but what are the consequences of this increasing air temperature? And one of them is the melting Arctic Ocean sea ice. And since 2016, I have been documenting the Icebreaker scientific research, and this is an airplane-based sea ice thickness research, which is led by German Alfred Wegener Institute. And since 2016, I have been following this airplane-based Arctic Ocean sea ice thickness survey, which is also the base at Station Nord in Greenland. The Alfred Wegener Institute has been conducting this research for 20 years, and the data shows that sea ice thickness decreased of 24%, approximately 24% over this 20 years, which is a huge change in the Arctic Ocean sea ice. And also just a mini information to this picture and what this scientific research means, that Alfred Wegener Institute conducts this research twice a year, once in the wintertime and once in the summer. And here we are at Station Nord in March, which is still, it's considered the wintertime. And here the temperatures are also minus 40 Fahrenheit, which is approximately the same in Celsius. And to be able to fly at that temperatures with an airplane at a place where there are no real airport, that means that if we want to take off at 8 a.m. in the morning, all the instruments on an airplane has to be heated up and starting the preparation at 4 a.m. And that we had every single day. And each research expedition takes approximately 3 weeks. What we can see here we see engineers and the science team sit in this research airplane for the survey. The airplane was built in 1942 and rebuilt for science with high technology. Each flight is about 6 hours round trip from Station North toward the North Pole and back. To keep the airplane on the lowest weight possible for long flight distances, it has zero comfort, meaning there are no toilets, no soundproofing, and zero insulation. And during the flight, we all have to wear these survival suits, and it feels like wearing a sauna. I want to talk a little bit more about this scientific research and how it is done. What we can see here, looking down from the airplane to the Arctic Ocean, and the survey flights are done at an altitude of 200 feet, which is approximately 70 meters, by towing a torpedo-like instrument called a bird. And this instrument is 45 feet above the sea ice. It has a laser and electromagnetic instrument to measure the sea ice thickness. Here we can see how this 12 feet long, approximately 3-4 meter long instrument is hanging on a metal cable under the airplane. It measures the sea ice thickness with electromagnetic and laser technology. And now new research shows that by 2035, we are on a track towards experiencing the first sea ice-free summer in the Arctic Ocean. And now I would like to talk a little bit about the Mosaic expedition and also about the preparation for this large expedition. So to prepare for Mosaic expedition, and Mosaic is the largest Arctic Ocean science expedition in our history, we had to undergo an intense safety training, like what we can see on this picture, like blindfolded rescue operation, moving inside the ship to rescue an unconscious person. We needed to be prepared to work in the northernmost part of the world, the Arctic Ocean, for 3.5 months. This was 3.5 months, was approximately the length of one group working there. During the expedition, we were at least 2-3 weeks away from any form of help in case of an emergency, and that was the reason why we had to be prepared with these safety trainings. This picture was taken in New Alice on Svalbard, and also where a Mosaic training, a scientific training, took place. Along the safety training, participants engaged a scientific training to ensure standard quality of the measurements during Mosaic. Here what we can see, or who we can see, is Anja Sommerfeld, and she is the project coordinator of Mosaic and a part of the atmospheric team, and she launches a weather balloon here at New Alice on Svalbard, which is the northernmost archipelago of Norway. This launch is a part of everyday experiment for 30 years at the station, And this measurement shows that Svalbard is the epicenter of global warming, where winter average temperatures increased by 6 to 8 Celsius since the measurement started. So now I want to talk about the Mosaic expedition itself. And here we can see Polarstern icebreaker frozen in the Arctic Ocean sea ice. During Mosaic expedition, Polarstern was frozen into the sea ice and drifted in the Arctic Ocean, in the central Arctic Ocean, while scientists from institutes from 20 countries conducted climate research for an entire year. And I also just want to show some images about the preparation and what it took and to prepare and work in these conditions on the sea ice. As we arrived to the ice floe, to which we were frozen and drifted with, in the central Arctic Ocean, we were running with the time. Actually, the day when we arrived was the last day when we saw the sun above the horizon, and the day after the sun was already under the horizon. So that was the reason we were running with the time. We were running to catch still a little bit light to be able to install all the instrument on the sea ice, because the days got shorter very fast, and we entered this darkness within just some days. And that was the reason why it was so important that all scientific instruments are already installed by the time we enter this black darkness. Here we can see Matthew Shoup. He's a senior scientist from University of Colorado, and he mounts instrument on an atmospheric tower at the meteorological station of Mosaic. It's called Met City. This tower was 11 meters high and had a lot of different instruments on it. And I remember taking these pictures. It was so incredible to imagine that he and also me was standing or kneeling on a 2-3 feet thick sea ice, and we had 4,200 meter deep ocean beneath us. During polar nights, first-time measurements were run, and this is the reason why this expedition was so important, to understand the processes in the Arctic Ocean during the winter time, and also to be able to use data for more precise future climate prognosis. What we can see here is scientists of the biogeochemistry team drill sea ice cores to measure greenhouse gases. They want to understand how much methane is broken down in the Arctic Ocean and how much is this extremely climate harmful gas ultimately reaches the atmosphere or remaining in the ocean. During Mosaic, we had the most modern and highest technology on the sea ice, and in the ship we still lived in a very simple life with no cell connection, no TV and no internet, and it was a very interesting contrast to see this extreme modern technology outside of the ship, and in the ship we lived like 100 years ago with no internet, no Facebook, no Instagram, no TV, no Netflix, no nothing. And also I have to say this is something what I enjoyed very much. When I'm on an expedition, I enjoy very much not having internet, because I feel I can concentrate much more on the work what I'm doing. What we can see here is that it looks like it's a moon-looking like science station, and it's called a remote sensing site, and it was using satellite technology. The goal of this station is to enable future satellite missions to measure snow thickness on sea ice in order to develop a better understanding on how snow affects sea ice decrease. This station was drifted away many times as the ice floe broke, and scientists had to rebuild it every single time. Science and scientific research at extreme location is always dictated by nature, by weather, and by wildlife around. And during this expedition, we were guests in the land of polar bears, where scientists conducted research in order to understand the changes of their environment. At the beginning of the expedition, two polar bear mom and her cub visited the scientific installation, and they were just very curious without damaging any of the installations. And I feel extremely honored that this photo won the WordPress Photo Award Environmental Single category in 2020. We experienced many storms and ice-breaking events, and every single time being outside on the ice floe in this weather was extremely challenging also for photography. But I wanted to be outside. I wanted to photograph also this moment to show that even in these extreme conditions, scientists were working on the ice floe, and it was very challenging because you couldn't see much. There was a lot of snow in the air. The wind was very strong, and it was very difficult to hear anything because of the strong wind. The sea ice was moving, and you had to really pay attention where you step on the sea ice. And here we can see what it meant to be in this darkness, and what it meant to be to move on the sea ice. And moving forward on the sea ice to get to science stations was always very slow, especially during polar nights, which we had during the first period. I experienced that for 2.5, 3 months. And when we had these events with ice breaking and ice moving, we had to many times use sleds to cross cracks and lead safely. And I remember that after Mosaic expedition, right after I returned back, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend National Geographic Storyteller Summit. And as I arrived to Washington, I was walking on the concrete streets, and that's when I realized that, wow, I don't have to pay attention to every single step I take, and I don't have to look around for polar bears, because walking on the concrete in a city is safe. And that's when I realized how much tension I had during these 3.5 months, every single day being on the sea ice. This is the last picture I want to show about Mosaic expedition, and this is also my favorite photo. And when I think about Mosaic expedition and when I think about this time, this is always the picture what is in my head, because this is what we always experience, and this is how it looked like our everyday life on the sea ice. And also when I look at this picture, this photo raises a question in me, how far can we go to understand our planet? We discover space, deep seas, and also for the first time the depth of the Central Arctic Ocean during the polar nights. Scientists walk here on a drifting sea ice with only light coming from Polarstern and their headlamps. And with their work, they highlight the future of the Arctic Ocean so that we have a better understanding how the changes will affect our life. Thank you.
What an incredible presentation, and what a unique body of work. I want to talk about your family background, but I feel like I'd like to stay with some of the powerful images I have, both of us being interested in nature and in photography and the forces of climate change and so on. What I'd be curious about is, how did you have a blank slate that is the Arctic? How did you feel? What was your strategy to communicate these powerful impressions that you were feeling? It's a minimal environment that you're in, and you don't have that many things to photograph, and yet you've got this rich story. How did you work around the minimal subjects and telling your story?
When I went on this very first assignment to the Arctic Ocean in 2015, that was on the US Coast Guard icebreaker Healy, and The assignment was to work with scientists and to document their work in the Arctic Ocean. And while I was on this expedition, I realized that this is exactly what I want to do. I want to work with scientists. I want to document their work, and I want to tell climate stories showing the work of the scientists, because I always have the question in me that we all know that Arctic Ocean sea ice melts. We all know that the average temperature in the Arctic increases 2 to 3 times faster than elsewhere on the planet. But my question in me is that who are the scientists telling us this information? Who are there? How do they work and live in this extreme harsh environment? So for me, this is always my angle, how I want to talk about climate change, how I want to talk about climate data. I want to show the story behind our climate data, which we can see in papers, which you can see in television, and that's the reason and that's the goal what I always have in my head, to follow different groups researching different aspects of climate change or global warming.
And so, this was not your first project. What was different to you about the Arctic? Something really clicked in you. Can you describe why it is the Arctic that has such a powerful force on you?
I would like to tell maybe some stories. Like the very first one, what I remember, I was 6 years old and I was born in Hungary, and still during behind the Iron Curtain, so the possibilities during that time was very limited. And I remember there was a scientific magazine in the television which started always with Japanese scientists walking in Antarctica in a storm. It was a black and white film clip. That time I didn't know it was Antarctica. I didn't know they are Japanese scientists. I googled it later, but I saw people walking in the storm in an extreme harsh environment. I knew it is one of the poles where they are walking. And I remember I was triggered by this film so much. This magazine was every week in the television, and because of these clips I wanted to watch this scientific program, because I was always imagining, like, wow, how it is to work in an environment like that, who can go there. And I had a feeling already as a child that I want to experience that as well. But of course, being a girl, being in Hungary, living behind the Iron Curtain, it felt like a different galaxy, a different universe, like absolutely unreachable for me as a 6 years old child, especially a girl. And so that's my very first memory what I have with the polar regions. And 2015 was the year that when I got this assignment. And this assignment was like a gift from the universe, that it was not something I applied for. It was Sabine Meyer, the director of photography for Audible magazine, who reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested to document this scientific research in the Arctic Ocean. And she asked me because, and based off my work, I did a work before, a long-term documentary about New York City Fire Department, and I did also a long-term documentary about sea turtle conservation in the United States. And she told me that based on these two works, she thought I could be a good candidate for this assignment. And when I got this assignment, I felt that this is one of the most important milestones in my life. And the email came with this question if I would go on this assignment on Wednesday, and on Monday I was already sitting in an airplane on the way to Alaska, on the way to Nome, where we boarded the U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker Healy. And why I was working on this expedition, and the scientific research started always very early, like 6 o'clock in the morning, and it went many times till very late, like midnight. And when I finished the photographing the different groups, I always spent the nights on the bridge and just being mesmerized by this view, being mesmerized and being fascinated by the sea ice, that we all imagine that sea ice and the Arctic Ocean is like could be a boring environment, a landscape. It's always everything white, it's everything only ice, but it's not the truth. It's for me, it's an extremely the most exciting environment on the planet, and unfortunately also the most fragile, where sea ice moves constantly, and where the light is changing constantly, and as the light is changing, the color of the sea ice is changing, the color of the ocean is changing, because you can see the ocean between the ice, and this constant changing, constant moving environment captivated me. And already there during this expedition, I decided that this is exactly what I want to document, and this is exactly what I want to work on, because I feel the urgency now that we have to talk about these changes, because we are close to a tipping point where we cannot turn back these changes, and we can lose an entire ecosystem, we can lose an entire environment if sea ice melts.
So true. Actually, last year, just at the beginning of the pandemic, went to Hokkaido, the southernmost place on the planet that has sea ice. It's on a parallel with Tuscany, Italy, believe it or not. But we arrived, and it was a very
Wow.
strong, yeah, a very strong surf, like almost like a milkshake. It looked like, and then the sea ice came in, and boom, it was suddenly calm and flat and minimalistic. So striking, and it was only minus 25 as opposed to what you experienced. Um, may I ask? So you had this impression in Hungary as a child of what it might be like in the Arctic. How different was the Arctic actually versus your ideas of it as a child?
The film clip, what I saw in this scientific magazine in the Hungarian television when I was 6 years old, compared to what I experienced, was very different until the expedition of Mosaic. And during Mosaic was the first expedition where I experienced that extreme harsh environment, because until that, Mosaic was the 11th expedition I documented. So all the 10 expedition before was in the summertime, or in a period where there is more calm weather in the Arctic or Antarctica. So yes, I experienced extreme cold temperatures, but until that time I did not experience these extreme harsh storms. But during Mosaic, being in the Central Arctic Ocean, in the wintertime, in the darkness, I experienced these extreme strong storms. We had days when we had 100 km/h storm and wind, like with blowing snow. And that was the moment where I felt myself like the people in that clip what I saw when I was 6 years old.
And so you mentioned University of Colorado scientist, which actually I went to University of Colorado, and the ice is only 2 feet thick, so that's less than 1 meter. Um, that's not very thick, is it? I would have thought 2 meters thick. Um, to me, I come away thinking it's fragile. How did you feel about that being only 2 feet thick, the sea ice?
When we arrived to Mosaic, to the ice floe, which was selected by the scientists, many parts of the ice floe, the sea ice was around like 2 feet thick. But that's strong enough to hold people, strong enough to hold instruments, but still it was a strange feeling to think about that we are standing on a moving sea ice, which is only 2 feet thick, and we have a 4,200-meter deep ocean underneath our feet. And I always had to remind myself that where I'm standing, and especially at the beginning of the expedition, we had some braking events where we could see the ocean, but majority of the time we had one large surface, and seeing this one large surface I had the feeling, or we had the feeling, that it could be like a land, it could be like a snow and ice covered land. But when sea ice moves, when you hear the cracks, it always reminds you are standing on a sea ice, on a drifting, moving sea ice, and you are working 7-8 hours on a moving sea ice, on a frozen ocean, and you have ocean under your feet, and it's a strange feeling. And it's the nature always remind you on that you are on a moving sea ice. You have to watch out, you have to watch every single step you make, and also you have to watch around, look around for polar bears, because they can be anywhere.
That's the incredible thing. The photo you made, of course, is incredible. But I found your story about when you were 600 meters from the ship, and for anyone who's not been on a glacier or on sea ice, 600 meters is far. It's, in other words, you cannot get back on your own easily. It's dark, it's blowing snow, it's minus 40. So your story about being 600 meters away and suddenly there's a radio transmission that says there's a bear coming, a polar bear is coming. It's dark and you have to get everyone out there. Can you try to translate again the adrenaline rush that you must have had when you got the news? And please tell us the end of the story. I don't want to tell the whole story for you.
Before going for Mosaic, it was suggested to do a polar bear safety training, and that meant to learn how to handle a signal pistol and also how to handle a rifle. And the reason for that was that if we had that, so to say, license or training, we could be, as a volunteer, polar bear guards for group to help out, that they can work on the sea ice, because every single group or every single person who went on the sea ice had to be accompanied by a polar bear guard. And that was still at the very beginning of the expedition. We were there at the ice floe just for some days, and we were still in the twilight, so it was not complete dark. I could see still a little bit. And I remember I was at the furthest station from Polarstern. I was at Med City, where we could see also this 11-meter tower. And scientists were working there, and I was their polar bear guard. I remember I was standing there with my binocular, I had my rifle with me, I had a signal pistol with me, and I was thinking about my grandfather. My grandfather was a hunter, and and he was also responsible for a large forest territory and all the animals living there. And I was thinking that he would be so proud of me standing here protecting people and being the polar bear guard. And while I'm thinking about my grandfather, suddenly I just hear that from the bridge they announced on the radio. I had a radio with me connected to the bridge, and they announced that 2 polar bears, a polar bear mom and a polar bear cub, is coming closer and closer to the vessel, and they are coming towards our direction. And every single station, every single person has to come back to Polarstern, and every polar bear guard has to evacuate the station where scientists are working, and they have to come back. We were luckily out there with 2 snowmobiles, and also each snowmobile had a sled, and we were approximately 12 people. So very tight, but we managed to get on this sled. I pegged every single person. I remember 2 people said that, no, you can go back first and we wait here. And I said, no way, everyone has to sit on the sled, on the snowmobile. You cannot stay there when 2 polar bears are arriving. And so we all got on the sled, and I felt the responsibility. I felt that my adrenaline was like just rushing and like shooting in the sky, because I was the one who had the rifle. I was the one who had the alarm pistol, and I felt that I'm the one who has to protect 12 people around me, and I'm also the one who has to protect myself. And so we got on the snowmobile. And we managed to get back to Polarstern, but as we got back, 12 people went on the ship, but there were still people out on the sea ice. So all the polar bear guards who were, and including me, who were out, we were standing, we stayed on the sea ice close to Polarstern, protecting all the people who were still on the way back to the vessel. And I remember that was like an extremely exciting experience, but also like with an adrenaline rush, because basically we were facing towards the direction where we were expecting the polar bears to come. And it was like a twilight, so you could see, you could not see, you were not sure if something is moving there, not moving there. So it's like it's a little bit spooky feeling. But I felt also that during this time, I felt I was on the top of the situation. I felt I know what I have to do. I know how I have to react. And then when everyone got on the ship, we also could get on the ship. And actually, that was a second when polar bears arrived. And yeah, it was my very first experience being a polar bear guard and seeing polar bears that close.
Just a real quick question. I mean, when I was in Antarctica, we were in an ice-free space, but still there are no landmarks other than hillocks and so on, and the weather could close in very quickly, and all landmarks could be erased. So we couldn't leave the station without a partner and without a radio. What were the protocols for leaving the ship?
Before the Mosaic expedition started, there were many, many years of preparation. And one of the major part of this preparation were safety on board and safety around the vessel. And there was a very strict protocol to follow when we went on the sea ice. And it meant that there were, so to say, opening hours when the sea ice were free to use and go out. It could not happen that, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning, I thought I go on a sea ice and I just went. It was everything very strict, organized. And the organization was, or the setup was the following, that 9 o'clock, the sea ice was, so to say, open. And from 9 o'clock until lunchtime, the polar bear guarding structure was established. That meant that there were 2 polar bear guards looking out for polar bears on the bridge. One of them was a part of the logistic team, and that person was also handling the radio with every single person. The group or the individual who wanted to go on the sea ice had to log into a system on board onto a computer, that you are going out. You had to write where you go, with whom you go, and when you return. If you did not return by the time you entered, an alarm went on everywhere on the ship, and you were called on the radio where you are and when you return. But if you knew you were not going to return by that time, you had to call the radio and somebody changed your time. Going on the sea ice, a polar bear guard has to accompany the group or the individual as well. And that polar bear guard had to have a rifle, a signal pistol, and also a rope, a radio. And if they went further out, they also had to use snowmobiles. They had to carry rescue box or safety box on the snowmobile. There were a lot of safety regulation, what you had to carry with you depending how far you went from the ship. And anytime, as you also mentioned, that the weather could change extremely fast in this environment, like within some minutes a fog can come in, a storm can come in, and suddenly you see nothing. And as the weather was changing or anything was changed, the people on the bridge could call in every team any second, and you could not say no. If you get the call from the bridge, you have to return. Everyone had to return because of safety. And also there was one person, while people were working on the sea ice, there was also one person on the working deck where people went down to the ship as a polar bear guard, so to say, protecting the this gangway from polar bears, and no polar bear can just walk up on this gangway. So it was extremely organized. And also walking on the sea ice, there were roads, so like roads marked by flags. We had green flags and we had red flags on the sea ice. Red flags showed a no-go area, and the green flag showed like the way you can walk. But every single time there was an ice-breaking event, there was a storm, the road structure completely changed, and the logistic team had to replace these green flags again and again and again. And still, if you could see the green flags, you have to be very careful how you walk, because ice-breaking events could happen any second. And I remember also when I experienced my very first ice-breaking event, I was out at a science station, and suddenly I could hear like a generator starting, and it was extremely loud. And I was thinking like, oh, there is a generator somewhere, because we had generators on the sea ice to run scientific instrument in case we lost power from the ship. But the second thought was, no, that's actually not a generator, because in the same moment I feel like an earthquake under my feet, and it's really like a feeling of an earthquake. The ice under your feet starts to shake. And I remember when it happened to me for the very first time, my first thought was like, I would love to just run away, but I didn't move. It was only in my head. And I was also thinking that I cannot run away anywhere. I'm standing on a moving sea ice, and the most safe reaction is to stand still and watch what is happening and move accordingly, slowly. And I remember that during this event, I could see with my own eyes how an ice ridge was creating front of my eyes, and actually the sea ice, the flat sea ice, just started to lift, and then created a ridge.
That is incredible. I mean, it's amazing that the ship is not crushed like in the old times. Yeah, I mean, absolutely incredible. Speaking about the weather and being photographers, I found it particularly interesting when you talked about needing to wear goggles or you could not see. And can you tell us about some of the things you had to do? And I'd like to actually ask you to add to what I've read about, and that is what you had to do in the field, but also when you came back into the warm space. How did you ensure that your equipment was not damaged?
Working outside on the sea ice in this extreme cold temperature, wind and storm was super challenging. Every single step you make, every single move, it's painful, it's hard, and it's slow. And working outside has so many aspects and so many things to think about. And I remember one of the most extremes is like being outside in a storm with 100 km/h wind. It's impossible to open your eyes. You have to wear goggles. And wearing goggles, it is completely black. It's completely black darkness. You see nothing. And the wind is blowing. You have a lot of snow in the air. And the only light is coming from the polar stand and the headlamp of the participants. So the light is extremely limited. Wearing a goggle and using the viewfinder of the camera to make, and the snow is blowing, you cannot use the autofocus of the camera, because it will just do like zzz and nothing else. So you have to use manual focus, and I'm happy to share some images like showing how it looks like to photograph in this, because sometimes you see nothing because of the headlamp. Sometimes you see too much because people look at you with their headlamp standing close by. You see that you are completely blinded, that they look away, and it's very difficult. You are just following the light, the headlamp of the people around you while there is a blowing snow, and I try to focus manually what I could. And I also have to say that there were days when I was out in this extreme storm. seeing nothing. I came back with 90% of the images were not sharp because I see nothing. And but those 10% of the images were a treasure for me because I could capture something like a superstorm outside. The other aspect of it is the cold, that being outside in this wind and in this cold is just many things, like changing a battery took so long and it's so painful, because changing a battery you have to take off your gloves, and you have to do it either with your hands or just with a liner on it. And if the temperatures are outside minus 35 Celsius and there is a strong wind, it can feel like minus 55. And being outside minus 55, even for some seconds, even for 10 seconds, it becomes painful. And just changing the battery on the camera, I could make it only in 2 steps, like preparing, okay, I'm going to change the battery. Where is the battery? Okay, there is the battery. First step, taking off the gloves. I took off the battery. I put the battery away, put back the gloves. Then I'm warming up my hands and making sure that nothing goes into the empty hole where the battery goes in, or I try to close it and I wait to warm up my hands. And step 2, I took off the gloves again, and then take the fresh battery, put the battery in, close it, back the gloves. And if I was out in this minus 55 wind shear temperature, that was the only possible way to do a changing a battery. It was not, and it is a 15-second or 20-second work, but I couldn't do this 20-second just in one way. I had to make a stop between to warm up my hands.
And how about when you went back on the ship? You've got a minus 35 degree Celsius camera, and you're going to introduce it to 20 degrees Celsius environment on the ship. How did you make that transition with your camera?
It is always a challenge how you deal with your equipment when you are outside in a minus temperatures and you go inside in a plus temperature. And also the outside, it is very dry, inside is more humid. How you deal with this temperature and humidity change, and it's always a lot of thinking how to solve it. And for example, during this expedition, usually I do it on every single expedition, but also here I did it in a way that when I finished my work outside, still outside, I put all the equipment into a plastic bag. I closed it and I took the camera with a plastic bag inside the ship. And immediately I left the camera at a place which was not that warm, to slowly warm it up. The other thing what I was doing is I always had a camera for inside the ship and from outside of the ship, because if I took the camera from outside inside the ship, you cannot use it for a while until it's got warmed. And the other thing what I was doing, that when I finished everything outside, I put everything back in my backpack. I closed the backpack and I took the camera inside the ship with the backpack without opening it. And so the backpack was still cold and inside cold, and I let for hours and hours to warm it up. But if I knew I'm going out again, then many times I just left the entire equipment outside. Only the batteries I took inside with me. I kept it outside with the bag.
Smart. Yeah, this is things people who don't work in that environment don't think about. Look, I really appreciate you joining me. Amazing information. One thing I like to do is circle for the last part back to climate change and your respect for the scientists that you are working with. They're amazing people, incredibly dedicated, and just to get there is a miracle unto itself. So can you talk to me a little bit about your feelings toward the scientists and what they're teaching us about climate change?
The reason why I am interested for the work of scientists is because they provide us so many important information. Without them, we wouldn't know anything how our planet is changing. And when we talk especially about climate change or global warming, we cannot talk about climate change just looking at one specific day. If I would look at climate change just looking at the data today, we wouldn't know anything about it. Talking about climate change, talking about changes and global warming is only possible because there are long-term measurements. There are measurements for 20, 30, 40, or even longer period of time. And these measurements are done many times every single day or periodically, constantly. And I'm fascinated by this human dedication that, for example, knowing that Svalbard is an epicenter of global warming, where the winter average temperature increased by 6 to 8 Celsius. We know it only because there are scientists in Svalbard at New Olison. There are scientists, they measure it every single day. They launch a weather balloon every day at 12 local time, at lunchtime, local time, and they do it every single day for 30 years. And this is what I'm so interested. I find this dedication fascinating. That scientists work in their field. They dedicate their life to one specific research field, and they work in their entire lifetime on that. And because of their dedication, because of their every single day work, we have this data. And this is my fascination. I was always a human photographer. I'm very interested for human beings. And as I started to work with scientists, for me, this is something just an incredible, this human dedication, what they put into their science in order that we have a better understanding about the changes, about climate change and global warming.
Absolutely amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And I am nourished by your stories, and I really appreciate you sharing your work on everyday climate change, which is one place you can find Esther's work. Thank you so much for joining me today on the first inaugural Everyday Climate Change Interviews podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James, for having me here. It was a pleasure to talk to you.